Hi. Yesterday after talking to you guys in class, it made me realize that a lot of you guys haven't solved quadratic equations by completing the squares. So I went ahead and did a little video on this just in case you didn't catch it all in class. And I actually think this method is easier than using the quadratic formula. Okay, so when you use the method completing by squares, you still have to set the quadratic equal to 0. Now in this case, I really think it's easier to bring that 2x over here and the 6 over to the left rather than moving my x squared to the right, for the reason that it's going to create a negative x squared, and in order to use completing of the squares, the leading coefficient has to be 1. Okay, so when I move all those pieces over, I'm going to have x squared minus 2x plus, or excuse me, it's going to end up being a minus 6, so let's fix that mistake. Minus 6 equals 0. Okay, now completing of the square is where you are trying to make you're trying to make a square binomial. So you're ending up at the end of this being able to solve it by the square root method. Okay, so I need to make a perfect square both in the first term and the last term. So I take that 6, and actually I shouldn't have moved that 6 over. I should have left it over here to begin with. So it becomes x squared minus 2x. I leave a blank where that third term is going to be, and I put that 6 now. Alright, so you take this middle term and you take half of that value, and half of that value is going to be a negative 1. And I just put a little love note down here because I need that in order to get my square binomial. Alright, then when you bring it back up here, you're going to square it. So negative 1 times negative 1 is plus 1. And because I add 1 here to the left side, I obviously have to do it to the right side. So now this becomes my perfect square binomial. If you look at that part right here in the middle, let me change my pen color so you're able to see it. Let me circle it here. Right here is my perfect square binomial. That becomes an x minus 1 squared. Now the reason I put my little love note right here is so that you see this is where it's coming from. It's right here inside the parentheses, and then on the left side you see it becomes, instead of a 6, it's going to be a 7. Now you solve the problem by doing the square root method. So if I square both sides of this problem, it then becomes x minus 1 equals plus minus square root of 7. Alright, you're going to bring over that 1 with a plus, so then it becomes x equals 7, or excuse me, x equals 1, let's fix that mistake, x equals 1 plus minus square root of 7. And there's your two answers that go to that quadratic equation. Okay? Okay, on this next problem, we're going to do one more just so you get the feel of it. Let's get the problem where it's hanging or not moving. I'm going to move that 5 over and with a minus, so it's going to become x squared plus 4x equals negative 5. Okay, now, I did forget to leave a space. Okay, when you're completing the square, you got to make sure you leave a space for that third term when you move that value over. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to look at this value of 4, the middle term, and take half of that. Half of that number, half of 4 is 2. Okay, so I'm going to put a 2 here, and it's just my little reminder of what I need to use when I do my square binomial. Okay, alright, so I bring that 2 back up in here and I square it, so that's going to be a positive 4, so I add a plus 4 over here. Okay, so now when I take my square binomial, if you look at the front term and this last term, they're perfect squares. So it's an x plus 2, and here's that little reminder that when I pulled that out of what was going to go back inside that parentheses. Okay, so x plus 2 squared equals negative 1, and now we're ready to go ahead and square root both sides of this problem. So I use a square root here and a square root on the right side. So it becomes x plus 2 equals plus minus square root of negative 1. Okay, now that square root of negative 1, remember we use the value of I for that because you can't really have a negative underneath your radical sign. So this becomes x plus 2 equals plus minus I. And then your very, very last step to finish this problem is that we're going to go ahead and take that and bring that 2 over. So x, we're going to go ahead, let's try that again, and put x equals negative 2 plus minus I. And you are done.